everybody, got lots to share today as we continue with our Egypt unit. We're now going to talk about the New Kingdom. So when you last had social studies, you learned that after leading Egypt to victory over the Hyksos, the Egyptians thought that Ahmose should be the new pharaoh, and they believed that Horus was inside of him because they thought that is the only way Ahmose could have gotten rid of the Hyksos. And they were like, by defeating the Hyksos, it's like defeating Seth. And who defeated Seth in Egyptian mythology? That would be Horus. So Horus must be inside Ahmose, which makes Ahmose the new pharaoh. And that's where historians say the dividing line for a time in history that's known as the New Kingdom begins. So during the New Kingdom, Egypt becomes richer and the cities become larger. Egypt also has its first female ruler, a woman named Hatshepsut. And it's a very interesting story how that came to be. And I'm about to tell you that right now. So Hatshepsut was married to a pharaoh named Thutmose, or sometimes it's pronounced Tutmos, or sometimes it's even pronounced Tutmosa. Let me tell you, Tutmosa the second. This is not King Tut. King Tut is an entirely different pharaoh. His full Egyptian name, King Tut, is Tutankhamun. Yeah, with a in there. So this is not that person, even though it has like a Tut sound to it. So her husband, Thutmose II, or like I said, it could be Thutmosa, or sometimes it's just Thutmose II, depends how you want to say him. He died, and her son, Thutmose III, is only 2 years old. So when a pharaoh, like the new pharaoh, should be Thutmose III, but because he's only 2 years old, he can't rule. So there has to be somebody that rules for Egypt. So she says, I'm going to rule for my son. Now, she does it. She rules Egypt, but there were certain rules, like in terms of being a pharaoh, like pharaohs had to dress a certain way and do certain things. So she's like, all right, fine by me. If pharaohs have to dress a certain way, I will dress that way. So she dressed in traditionally men's clothing. She also wore a fake beard because a lot of pharaohs had beards. So she's like, I'm not going to let that stop me from being in charge while my son is growing up. Now, she's really interested in increasing trade, keeping peace, and building temples to the gods. I don't have this. Hold on. Temple. I thought I had this queued up. So this is one of the temples she has built. It is pretty amazing. It is built like on the side of a mountain. So yeah, so this is one of the temples Hatshepsut has built. Let's see if we can check it out in person. Yeah. So this would be us. Let me spin it around so you can see the temple that she has built. Let's see if any good videos of our little temple. Let's try and see. No, this is taking too long to load. You get a good sense of what the temple looks like. So this is her most famous temple. Pretty impressive stuff. So she's all about peace. She's all about trade. She makes peace deals with an area to the south that is called Punt. Punt is located in the land that is today the country of Somalia, and I'm going to show you right now where that is. So here's our map. Here's Egypt. if we go down the Red Sea over here, we get to an area. Oh, didn't mean to click that. Let's go back. I clicked part of Yemen. That's what you're looking at. Say hi to Yemen, everybody. Oh, and now we're in the United States. Let's zoom out. Let me go back to where it was. See, look at this. I went to show you the land of Punt, and we ended up in Yemen. We took a wrong turn and ended up in Yemen. How does that happen? So let's move my map all the way over here. Okay, so here's Egypt. We're going to go down the Red Sea. I'm not going to make a wrong turn. And there's my wrong turn that I clicked and ended up in Yemen. So this is Somalia. And this part of Africa, let me zoom out so you can see. This part of Africa is actually known as the Horn of Africa because this looks like a little bit like a horn. So this is the ancient land of Punt. It's mostly Somalia. It's also a little piece of Ethiopia. And then this little tiny country that is very funny to say. And if you know how to pronounce this country, you know what I'm about to say. And if you didn't, you're probably like, wait, it starts with a D. How do you pronounce it? Well, in English, it's Djibouti. Yes, there is a country called Djibouti, and there it is. So technically the sentence, there is Djibouti, is accurate to our lesson today. So there you go. So anyway, this is where Punt is. So she arranges a peace deal with Punt so they can trade by sailing ships up and down the Red Sea and across the Gulf of Aden. Now, we're going to talk about what was in that trade deal. So Egypt sent the people of Punt, and they were called Puntites, beads, so the Puntites could make different jewelry, metal tools that they can use, and also weapons. So they traded those things for Punt. And in return, Punt would send them ivory. That's like elephant tusks. It's illegal to trade or buy anything that is ivory. It was banned worldwide in the 1970s, but obviously in ancient times that was not the case. Ebony, which is like a very dark colored wood. Hunting dogs they would send to Egypt. Monkeys. It wasn't too common, but there were Egyptians that had some pet monkeys, which is pretty interesting. Leopard skins that the Egyptians would use sometimes as like carpets and sometimes as like little shawls or jackets. And then something called incense. And if you don't know what incense is, it's like a lot of times today it's like little sticks of incense and you light it and then you blow it out and the smoke has like a certain flavor or smell. So that's something that the Egyptians got from Punt. So the way trade works is Punt couldn't get these things, so they were able to trade things to Egypt. Egypt couldn't get these things in Egypt, so they needed to make a deal with Punt. So you always traded your excess, your surplus. So that was the trade deal that Hatshepsut negotiated. Now, when Thutmose III was old enough, he took over as pharaoh. When he turns 18, he takes over as pharaoh. And before that happened, Hatshepsut died a few months earlier, before her son took over. And what happened is, in between Hatshepsut dying and Thutmose III taking over, government officials were ruling for those few months in between. And here's what happens. It's a little bit of a scandal. Well, they say to Thutmose III that they basically say, your mom being in charge of Egypt is upsetting Ma'at. Now, some of you might be thinking, who the heck is Ma'at? I'm about to tell you. So Ma'at is the Egyptian goddess of truth, justice, order, balance, and harmony. Now, all of these things are obviously very important to the Egyptians, but there's a certain thing that is so important that they try and work towards. So shout out what you think. Which of those 5 things you think is going to be the one they hone most in on? Well, if you shouted out balance, you are correct. The Egyptians wanted to stay balanced because of the whole weighing of the heart in the underworld. So when the government officials say to Thutmose III, Hatshepsut, your mom, being in charge, totally messed up Ma'at, the goddess of balance, Thutmose III is very concerned, because then he's like, then good people might end up getting, not going to the afterlife. They might have their heart eaten by that monster Ammit. He's very worried. Now, here's why the government officials are saying that. This is like a scam, a scandal. The government officials hated Hatshepsut, hated her. And the reason why is they wanted to rule for the years between Thutmose II and Thutmose III being old enough. So a lot of historians say that they said this story to Thutmose III out of revenge. So when Hatshepsut's husband, Thutmose II, dies, Thutmose III is 2 years old. So the government officials wanted to rule for those 16 years, but Hatshepsut steps in and prevents it. And a lot of historians say that when Hatshepsut dies, this is the government officials kind of getting their revenge for, not being in charge as long as they could have been. So what ends up happening is Thutmose III is persuaded to destroy evidence of Hatshepsut's reign. They destroy statues and things like that. Now you may be thinking like, oh, did they destroy the temple? Not the temple, because even though Hatshepsut has this built, it's a temple to the gods. Specifically, it's many gods it's a part of, but also Ra is one of the main ones here. And they were like, well, if we do anything here, that would be offending Ra, so the temple can stay. It's very rare for certain things from Hatshepsut to be found. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City has some Hatshepsut statues. Let me see if I can find them. Hatshepsut. They actually have a whole room of statues, and some of them are damaged. Yeah, let's check it out. So, this is something, obviously, if this was normal school, I'd be like, oh my gosh, it's New York City, you should go check it out. But obviously, with things being the way they are, it's difficult to go to. Where is my... No, I want to see the pictures. All right, hold on. Let's go back. I'll show you the pictures. Because there's like a whole room of Hatshepsut statues. Yeah, so this is one of the most famous ones because it's made out of ivory. So this is a statue, and you can see where it was damaged. Like they knocked it over, but it's made out of ivory. Very rare. That's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Some more of them show, let's see. Oh, this is the Hatshepsut room from the Met. You can see there. So these are all really rare because they were ones that survived the destruction that was ordered by Thutmose III. All right, so the next thing that happens is, in addition to doing that, Thutmose III is all about war. He's like, all right, I need to be the opposite of my mom because my mom was all about peace. So I'm going to be all about war, and maybe that'll help balance the whole Ma'at situation. So before I go on and talk more about this, let's learn a little bit more about Hatshepsut. So this is one of those, I had mentioned that we're going to see more of these. This was done by Ted Ed. It's a little more about Hatshepsut.
3,500 years ago in Egypt, a noble pharaoh was the victim of a violent attack. But the attack was not physical. This royal had been dead for 20 years. The attack was historical, an act of damnatio memoriae, the damnation of memory. Somebody smashed the pharaoh's statues, took a chisel, and attempted to erase the pharaoh's name and image from history. Who was this pharaoh, and what was behind the attack? Here's the key. The pharaoh Hatshepsut was a woman. In the normal course of things, she should never have been pharaoh. Although it was legal for a woman to be a monarch, it disturbed some essential Egyptian beliefs. Firstly, the pharaoh was known as the living embodiment of the male god Horus. Secondly, disturbance to the tradition of rule by men was a serious challenge to Ma'at, a word for truth expressing a belief in order and justice, vital to the Egyptians. Hatshepsut had perhaps tried to adapt to this belief in the link between order and patriarchy through her titles. She took the name Ma'at Kare and sometimes referred to herself as Hatshepsut, with a masculine word ending. But apparently, these efforts didn't convince everyone, and perhaps someone erased Hatshepsut's image so that the world would forget the disturbance to Ma'at and Egypt could be balanced again. Hatshepsut, moreover, was not the legitimate heir to the throne, but a regent, a kind of stand-in co-monarch. The Egyptian kingship traditionally passed from father to son. It passed from Thutmose I to his son Thutmose II, Hatshepsut's husband. It should have passed from Thutmose II directly to his son Thutmose III, but Thutmose III was a little boy when his father died. Hatshepsut, the dead pharaoh's chief wife and widow, stepped in to help as her stepson's regent, but ended up ruling beside him as a fully fledged pharaoh. Perhaps Thutmose III was angry about this. Perhaps he was the one who erased her images. It's also possible that someone wanted to dishonor Hatshepsut because she was a bad pharaoh. But the evidence suggests she was actually pretty good. She competently fulfilled the traditional roles of the office. She was a great builder. Her mortuary temple, Djeser Djeseru, was an architectural phenomenon at the time, and is still admired today. She enhanced the economy of Egypt, conducting a very successful trade mission to the distant land of Punt. She had strong religious connections. She even claimed to be the daughter of the state god, Amun. And she had a successful military career, with a Nubian campaign and claims she fought alongside her soldiers in battle. Of course, we have to be careful when we assess the success of Hatshepsut's career, since most of the evidence was written by Hatshepsut herself. She tells her own story in pictures and writing on the walls of her mortuary temple, and the red chapel she built for Amun. So who committed the crimes against Hatshepsut's memory? The most popular suspect is her stepson, nephew, and co-ruler, Thutmose III. Did he do it out of anger because she stole his throne? This is unlikely, since the damage wasn't done until 20 years after Hatshepsut died. That's a long time to hang on to anger and then act in a rage. Maybe Thutmose III did it to make his own reign look stronger, but it is most likely that he or someone else erased the images so that people would forget that a woman ever sat on Egypt's throne. This gender anomaly was simply too much of a threat to Ma'at and had to be obliterated from history. Happily, the ancient censors were not quite thorough enough. Enough evidence survived for us to piece together what happened, so the story of this unique, powerful woman can now be told.
All right, so there you definitely learned a little bit more about Hatshepsut. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff in terms of the cover up and things like that. And that was one of the main things, was the whole like restoring Ma'at's balance, but also the Egyptians were having a tough time believing that Hatshepsut was a valid ruler, because they were like, how could Horus be inside of you? So Thutmose III tried to do everything he could to be the opposite of Hatshepsut, including going to war. So he sent his army into what is today Syria and Israel, and conquered that land with an army of 20,000 soldiers using bow and arrows, spears, and chariots. So what he does is he goes in and conquers what is today Israel, Lebanon, Syria. And then in the last set of notes, remember you learned about a group, the Hyksos, that were in Jordan. He completely annihilates them, wipes them out. They're now gone from the picture. So he conquers this chunk of land for Egypt. Because he's like, she was about peace, I'm going to be about war. And then maybe balance will be, restored. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the Egyptian religion because some interesting things happen. During the New Kingdom, the Egyptians started to worship a new god. And I know what you're thinking, like, how does a new god come about? Well, here's the story. It wasn't really like a new god, but maybe new to some of the Egyptians. So, the god that I'm talking about was the god of the city of Thebes, and his name was Ammon. And Amos, you remember him, the person that led the rebellion against the Hyksos. He was from the city of Thebes, and when he becomes pharaoh, they say, Memphis, the former capital, forget you. Our new capital city is going to be Thebes because that's where the great Amos was from. And this means that the god of Thebes, Ammon, starts getting, going up the charts in popularity among the Egyptians. Well, because Thebes was the capital, like I said, Ammon is considered more powerful because they were like, now there's this city that's the capital, that's going to make this god probably more powerful because more people pray to Ammon because it's the capital city of ancient Egypt. Now, if you had to say which god is worshipped the most in ancient Egypt, it would be Ra, the sun god. But what happened is this. People started to worship both Ra and Ammon simultaneously. So instead of doing like, here's my prayers to Ra and here's my prayers to Ammon, they started to say, instead of, doing separate prayers, I'm going to pray to them both at the same time. And they started to join the prayers and they kind of ship the names. So if you know what I'm talking about when I say like the names got shipped, they start to pray to Ammon Ra. So it leads to the belief that Ammon, the god of Thebes, and Ra, the sun god, have joined forces and become this combination god, Ammon Ra, that they consider to be the most powerful. And lots of temples get built for Ammon Ra, this merger of Ammon and Ra. And like I said again, the merger happens because people just combine the prayers. It would be like, if you, let's say, were like, oh, I'm going to pray to the ice cream gods. And instead of, let's say you like, I don't know, chocolate and you like peanut butter. So then all of a sudden you're like, instead of eating them separately, I'm going to combine them together. And oh my gosh, how amazing is chocolate and peanut butter? Like that kind of situation is happening. Now, temples in ancient Egypt become more than places to worship. They are also places of industry. So some things that went on at the temple are the following. You had sculptures being done, so sculpting, furniture building was at the temple, making clothes, and also that's where the wealthy sent their kids to school. Goods were also stored at the temples. Now, speaking of school, the boys in ancient Egypt, if they were wealthy, were trained to be scribes. Those are writers, just like Mesopotamia. The right to be a scribe was passed down from father to son. So, like, what would happen is a dad that was a scribe, their son would learn to write in school, and they would kind of, have a family business and eventually pass it on to their son. And then they would, take over the business of being a scribe. Scribes could be hired for a lot of things. Priests would hire them to write down different spells, charms, or prayers. So there was a religious purpose for scribes. They could also be hired and work for the government to keep track of things like how much grain there is and also tax records. They could be independent, and someone could be like, I have this great idea that I want written down, and hire them for the day. And you might be thinking like, well, why don't they just write it down themselves? Well, just kind of like how something, if you're a boss and you have like a secretary, sometimes you'll tell the secretary what you want, let's say a letter to say, and the secretary like writes it. Just kind of like that. Next, they're also hired by doctors to write medical prescriptions. And look at this. You might not have realized this. Look what word is in the word prescription. Script, meaning writing. So, lots of different jobs for scribes. Hieroglyphics is the Egyptian writing. It's a system of writing where pictures stand for words or sounds. And later on in this Egyptian unit, we're going to learn a lot more about hieroglyphics. The Egyptians would carve or paint hieroglyphics onto different monuments. So it's similar to cuneiform, but it has some differences, like I'll show you. Some hieroglyphics. So yeah, there you see different hieroglyphics. You can see different kind of pictures of things. Pretty cool stuff. It's interesting. The next thing I'm going to show you. For a long time, people didn't know what hieroglyphics meant until this was discovered, and that is the Rosetta Stone. So let's get a good picture of the Rosetta Stone here. And I know some of you are like, Rosetta Stone. Oh, and if you're like, oh, Wikipedia, I'm just using Wikipedia for the picture, not using it for the words. So Rosetta Stone, there it is. It's huge, right? And you can see there are 3 different kinds of writing on the Rosetta Stone. So let me back up and explain this a little bit. So for a long time, people didn't know what hieroglyphics meant. They were like, ooh, the Egyptians have this mysterious writing. What's going on? We don't know. And then in about a little more than 100 years ago, there was a soldier in the town of Rosetta in Egypt that stumbled upon this stone. And this is pretty interesting because the top part is written in hieroglyphics, the language of the ancient Egyptians. The middle part is written in a language called Demotic. And then down here, it's very hard to see, but this is Greek. So archaeologists were like, this is pretty fascinating. So when they were looking to translate what it says, they noticed that the Greek and the Demotic said exactly the same thing. So then they hypothesized and they said, well, what if the hieroglyphics say the exact same thing as the Demotic and the Greek? Because they knew how to read Greek and they knew how to read Demotic. It was just hieroglyphics they didn't know how to read. And when they said, okay, this symbol is in the same spot that this Demotic word is and this Greek word is, so this symbol must mean this. And they started to plug it into other kind of hieroglyphic writings, and things started to make sense. So some of you, when you saw me type in Rosetta Stone, might have been like, hey, that's the software that teaches you languages. Well, that company named itself Rosetta Stone because the actual Rosetta Stone was a stone found in the town of Rosetta, Egypt, that taught historians how to read hieroglyphics. Now, you might be curious, what does the Rosetta Stone actually say? It's actually just tax records, so that's a little disappointing. It's not like juicy gossip on the Egyptians. All right. Over time, the priests who worked at the temple of Amun-Ra started to gain power because the new god was so popular, so there started to be tons of offerings at temples of Amun-Ra. And there were so many offerings being given to Amun-Ra that the priests had enough stuff that they started to trade some of the offerings to get pieces of land. And they started to control a third of all of Egypt's land. And then when you control that much land, you start to have say in things, and they started to influence the government officials. Now, at this time, it's around the year 1370, and there's a pharaoh that's in charge. His name is Amenhotep IV. Amenhotep IV doesn't like how powerful the priests of Amon-Ra are becoming, and how ordinary Egyptians are giving them so many offerings. So Amenhotep IV is like, he's a little jealous. So he says, we're going to put a stop to this. We have to do something to make the priests less powerful. Now, he can't attack the god Amon-Ra, because that would be a big no-no. So he's like, how do I make them less powerful? So he says, I'm going to close the temple and fire the priests. And he thought that if people didn't have a place to worship Amon-Ra, they wouldn't be giving offerings, and then Amon-Ra wouldn't be as powerful. Well, Amenhotep IV then says, Amon-Ra is so powerful because it's like a new idea. So Amenhotep IV is like, if they want a new god, I'm going to create a new god so that the Egyptians will worship that god. So what he does is this. He names his new god. He says, hear ye, or something like that. There is a brand new god in Egypt, and that god's name is Aten. And Amenhotep IV says, this new god, Aten, is more powerful than any other god that exists. And the Egyptians are like, what the heck? That's like some crazy stuff. Amenhotep IV even changes his name to Akhenaten, which means spirit of Aten. And Amenhotep IV starts saying, Aten is so powerful, Horus isn't inside of me, Aten is inside of me. Aten is more powerful than Horus. Now, people don't go for this new religion in Egypt. In fact, the only people that start to follow this new kind of god and religion are Amenhotep IV's friends and family. So that idea doesn't really work out. Now, Amenhotep IV has a very famous wife and a very famous son. His wife is a woman that you might know about in ancient history. Her name is Nefertiti. And their son is the very famous King Tut. So I want to show you just a little bit about Nefertiti. Let me get there he is, my Nefertiti video, so we can learn a little bit about her, because she's a pretty interesting person in history. Oh, look, we're going to have to watch an ad.
Built for America. Built Ford proud.
Okay, there we go. Nefertiti.
Nefertiti is a dazzlingly beautiful woman. No one really knew who she was. No one was looking for her. And then suddenly there she was in all her splendor.
Rumored to be the most beautiful woman in Egypt during the 14th century BC, Nefertiti means the beautiful woman has come.
What we do know about Nefertiti is that she was Egyptian and not a foreign princess, tall, thin, and at least her husband wanted her to be portrayed as beautiful.
Nefertiti married Pharaoh Amenhotep IV around age 15. The couple was a formidable force in Egypt.
Definitely we know Nefertiti was not her husband's sister, which is rare enough in the Egyptian dynasties. So hooray for genetic diversity.
Together, Nefertiti and Amenhotep established a new religion, the cult of Aten, which shifted worship from the god Amen to the god Aten.
Nefertiti and Amenhotep basically created their own religion. They said, this is the way it is. We are in charge. We are second to God. The end. So people were a little upset.
She changed her name to Neferu Aten Nefertiti. Beautiful are the beauties of Aten. A beautiful woman has come. And with her husband, now named Akhenaten, they moved the court to a new city.
So essentially, Akhenaten was asking people to say, if you want to be part of the government, you have to move from your turf to my turf and play by my rules.
Nefertiti is depicted as being more powerful than previous queens, sometimes even pictured with the crown of a pharaoh.
Nefertiti and Amenhotep, as a couple, were kind of a 14th century BC power couple. At least that's how they're depicted in a lot of the artifacts. And she was elevated to a position higher than any other queen in Egyptian history.
All depictions and writings of Nefertiti mysteriously disappear after about 12 years.
There's a good argument to be made for the fact that she became a king. If she was probably crowned only because this little boy, Tutankhamun, was too young to rule on his own, and she was afraid he wasn't going to be able to maintain the changes that they'd made.
The famous bust of Nefertiti was discovered by Ludwig Borchardt in 1913, launching her to modern fame.
That bust, that iconic image, gave us something to hang our hats on, gave us something to put on tote bags and t-shirts and keychains. That's why we talk about her.
Okay, so an interesting thing about Nefertiti, so there are historians, like you saw in the video, that think that maybe, just like Hatshepsut, she was pharaoh until her son King Tut was old enough, and then maybe the Egyptians, again, wanted to destroy any record of that, and maybe they were successful, which is why historians haven't really found enough evidence to declare that. So, but who knows? Maybe one day they'll announce that discovery, and that'll be, another kind of thing that happens with ancient Egypt. All right, so here's how Egypt kind of changes in the end. So over time, the Egyptians start to lose power because once again, we have a struggle between the priests and the pharaohs. The pharaohs say the priests are getting too powerful. The priests are like, but the people are presenting these offerings for the gods. They want us to have it, and it becomes a mess. Egypt also spends a lot of time and resources trying to rule neighboring lands. The best weapons at the time were made out of iron. And iron didn't exist as a natural resource in Egypt, so they had to trade a lot of their products to get it, so they can get more weapons and keep control of their neighbors. Over time, what's going to happen, I'm fast forwarding a little bit, in the year 671 BCE, the Egyptians get taken over by a group known as the Assyrians. They come from Mesopotamia. So the Assyrians, over here, take over the Egyptians. So the Assyrians are like Mesopotamia 2.0, version 2.0. And we're going to learn about the Assyrians in like December. We'll learn about them. So the Egyptians get taken over by the Assyrians, and then they're independent. Then the Greeks take them over for a while. Then they're independent. Then the Romans take them over for a while. So we'll be talking about Egypt this whole year. And what you're going to see is a lot of the ideas that Greece becomes famous for, Rome becomes famous for, kind of get their start in Egypt. So Egypt had a lot to do with a lot of the European ideas that become very popular. All right, so that is a wrap on Egypt Notes Part 5.